Hello there. The year 2021 is just a month old, but already the crackdown on the media has got a distinctly new flavor. In just the last couple of days, we've had several high profile journalists charged with sedition. We've had several hundred Twitter handles being withheld, including one that belongs to the Caravan magazine. What to make of this and what are the questions we should be asking? Let's talk to Nikhil Pahwa. He's the founder editor of Media Nama. And also joining us is Hartosh Singh Bal of the Caravan magazine, whose own colleagues have had sedition cases against them and they've been dealing with it. Hartosh, I'm going to come to you first. There was a huge storm on Twitter internationally because the Caravan handle was withheld. And a few hours later, it was restored. And this comes just a day after Vinod Jose, your editor, got a sedition case against him. The Nats had a sedition case against them. It must have been a pretty hectic last couple of days.
That a couple of days before that, one of our contributors was arrested by the police. So,
indeed,
put that all together. Yeah, it's an acceleration of what we've seen since 2014 when Narendra Modi first came to power. The first, I think, term was defined by overall crackdowns mediated through owners and financial pressures. But from 2019, I think the gloves have come off. Any kind of pretense, if there ever was any, is gone now. This is hardcore Hindutva, majoritarian fundamentalism, Modi's second term. You've seen the Ram Mandir, you've seen Kashmir, and on media it is clear now what is to be done. Over the course of the past year, in Caravan, we've had our journalists assaulted while covering violence against Muslims, basically in the Delhi so-called riots, but basically engineered by the BJP and the police itself. We've had a journalist attacked in a police station. Now we've had a contributor arrested. Our editors, owners have cases booked against them for sedition. The Twitter handle gone. It's par for the course, I guess. We are gearing up for more, but we have to keep doing what we are doing. Otherwise, I mean, what remains of the media? But the clear idea is to stop us from doing our work.
Yes, and including using the tool of sedition. We'll come to that in a moment. But Nikhil, there was anger at Twitter for having done this. And then there were people who said, look, Twitter was just following guidelines. But, I was reading a Media Nama article and it said that the speed with which all this happened was quite puzzling. The speed with which these Twitter handles were restored, for instance.
Yeah, look, the thing about this entire episode is that we don't know what is going on. We don't know why these orders were issued, on what grounds they were issued, why they were revoked, whether they were revoked, whether Twitter decided to fight. We have no clue about what's happening over here. And that's why there is a complete lack of transparency, both from the government as well as from Twitter. And frankly, as citizens, it is our right to know what is going on. These orders were most likely, and again, we don't know, were issued under Section 69 of the IT Act, Section 69A, under which, access to information that is generated or transmitted, received or stored or hosted can be prevented or blocked in the interest of, number one, sovereignty and integrity of India, defense of India, security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states or public order, or for preventing incitement to the commission of any cognizable offense related to these factors that I mentioned earlier. Which of these is it? We don't know. So, Section 69 also prevents Twitter from disclosing reasons apart from the fact that they got a legal order. I actually don't even know whether they can disclose that they've received a legal order in this case. And that's the problem with Section 69. When we were fighting that case in the Supreme Court, the famous Shreya Singhal case, back in 2013, 14, 15, Section 69 was one of the aspects that was challenged, and it was upheld in that judgment because it said that there is a due process in place. Now, what kind of application of mind, what kind of committee was in place that an order was issued with this speed and that it was removed with this speed? And I sincerely hope that even though the orders have been removed and these accounts are back up, there is a committee that meets, that ascertains whether these orders were legitimate orders or not. And, I don't think anyone's going to get punished for this because, there is no outside scrutiny. So no one's going to punish anyone within the government for acting on orders, and on whose orders were these particular things done. We don't know. I just
Yes.
think there should be transparency and accountability. If our speech is being censored, if there are sedition cases that are being filed, and frankly, for me, um, there should be no law for sedition. A sedition law is just an indication that we have a weak and insecure state that can't stand up to speech. If there is incitement to violence, no doubt that needs to be dealt with. But sedition is a different kettle of fish. It has no place in a democracy.
Yes, and there is the quote I read that I'm going to probably read out a little while later in this conversation, but it's all about how before it was dissent that was being criminalized, now it's just merely disagreement. Hartosh, there are many ways to kind of put pressure on the media. We in India, of course, we've seen pretty much every tactic used, but in recent years, it seems sedition as a tool is increasingly being used. And it so happens that today, article14.com released a report saying that they're basically going to be tracking all these sedition cases. And there's some interesting data here. We'll put it up on the screen. In the last 10 years, nearly 11,000 people have been charged under sedition in India. And 65% of these people have been charged by the Modi administration, which from 2014 onwards. And since 2014, incidentally, more than 90% of these cases that have been filed have been against people just criticizing politicians or governments. So my question to you, sedition is being used for just criticizing anybody? And why sedition in particular? There are so many other tools.
I mean, first of all, I am no longer mincing words. It's what we are trying to do is make sense of what a government that is staffed by buffoons from top to bottom is doing and why it is doing it. It's frankly difficult to impose rationality on a structure itself, which is motivated by completely irrational concerns about preserving its image and its ego in some senses, because there is no issue of national sovereignty involved in any of these cases. In the first place, look, there are two things happening. What you mentioned about Twitter handles, the complete arbitrariness which belongs to actually a dictatorship. We don't know what we were charged with, why our handle was brought down, why it was restored, what was the content that was a problem. There was some, we have now enough media, sponsored media, who will put out some tweet saying this is what the government actually wanted to do. So they picked up some hashtag which was supposedly about Modi planning genocide, which is not incitement to anything. It can be a false accusation at most. But our handle had nothing to do with that hashtag. So we don't even know why that hashtag came down. So basically that means you can take down Twitter handles, you can attack organizations, stop them from disseminating information without any grounds whatsoever, without any explanations whatsoever on any context. Then you come to this question of sedition. Now suddenly sedition seems to apply from a cartoonist, a writer, to somebody putting up a Facebook tweet, to a magazine doing journalism, to somebody who's reporting eyewitnesses. What is the latest sedition charge against? That some people reported that eyewitnesses saw police shoot and lead to the death of a person. The police has a different version. Well, let the police establish that version. They are citing a postmortem. We are saying that postmortem is problematic because experts are questioning it. I don't know if my saying this might get you into trouble here as a platform, but the fact is, this is the fact. They can keep filing FIRs, but they can't stop us from saying what is the actual facts on the ground. But somehow this counts as sedition. It counts as incitement to public rioting. On what grounds? There should be some ability to defend. And then you have the cases being repeated in court after court with the same order, the same language, the same words. If it were not such a serious matter, this would be a laughable joke. I mean, you have to have some sort of a Charlie Chaplin look at Hitler kind of image of what is happening in this country, because it is ridiculous and it is dangerous at the same time.
Right. Nikhil, I'm going to ask you about the legitimacy of these actions, both by the government and by Twitter in a little deeper detail, because there's inconsistency and, as you yourself noted, there's opacity as well.
Well, if you think about it, sometime last year, Akar Patel's Twitter handle was also blocked. And then for no particular, which was blocked for no particular reason, it was reinstated for no particular reason. So there is a sense of arbitrariness with the way Twitter also acts. And let's not forget, Twitter itself has been under a lot of pressure in India. It was, if you remember, just before the 2019 elections, the Parliamentary Standing Committee led by Anurag Thakur at that point in time had pulled up Twitter for having an anti-right-wing bias. More recently, the Joint Parliamentary Committee that was looking at the data protection bill pulled up Twitter for reasons not related to privacy. So, you know, there are, I mean, that's what was issued in the public by the chairperson, you know. And so some of these things are quite, it looks like there is pressure on Twitter because of the impact that Twitter has on the mainstream media that uses Twitter to report on what is happening. So there is clear inconsistency from Twitter as well. And unfortunately, we don't have any accountability today from any platform, and we can't even expect to have accountability from them because there is no accountability from the state. At the end of it, they are a private platform and performing a public function. And structurally, under the law, they are free to censor whatever they want. I know this is going to sound very non-serious, but you know, it's like a football forum should be allowed to ban messages related to cricket on it if it doesn't want that kind of an environment. These are all private platforms, right? They have taken on a public function because of their scale. And so the tricky part for us is, how do we hold them accountable to the public under these circumstances? It's very difficult. I don't think we can, but we need to hold our state accountable. And how we do that is something that I don't know, because the law prevents accountability. Section 69 by its design ensures that the government is not accountable to the public, it's only accountable to itself.
Okay, that is an interesting point, and I want to take that a little further, Nikhil, especially comparing Twitter.
I wanted to add one more point to this, Venkatesh.
Go ahead.
If you go back to August last year, when the Chinese apps were banned, they were also banned under Section 69. Again, I'm saying also, I don't know whether this ban was under Section 69. In that case, the government actually issued a press release, whereas under Section 69, it had no reason to issue a press release. So there is transparency when it comes to the China apps ban, but there is no transparency when it comes to the ban on Twitter handles. And frankly, the other thing is that I don't know whether Section 69 actually allows the ban of accounts versus the ban of a particular tweet or a particular message, because as I read the details, the wording of the particular clause itself, it's information that is disseminated or published, etc. An account by itself is not information, it's just an account. So how that account has been banned by Twitter and why Twitter isn't challenging that in court is also questionable.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to make a comparison after I come back to you between Twitter in India and Twitter in the United States. But Hartosh, you know, one of the things I wanted to cite was, you know, the Article 14 piece that came out today, the tracker of sedition. It also quoted Justice Madan Lokar, the retired judge of the Supreme Court. And he said two things, and I'm going to read out both those things. The first he said was, and I open quotes, "It is now clear that the law is not being misused, it is being abused." Close quote. And the second thing he said was, as I mentioned earlier before, it's not just dissent that is being criminalized, but disagreement as well. Can you explain this? What is meant by that especially? It's not just dissent, but disagreement.
Look, as far as dissent and disagreement, it's very clear. Dissent would be that we were being held accountable for criticism of the government, scrutiny of the government. Disagreement is merely where the government puts out one version and all that anybody is reporting is a version which does not match up entirely in part or fully with what the government is putting out, because that those are the facts on the ground. Here there is no question of challenging or questioning the government. Here we are saying is, look, you said A, on the ground there is something that is being said which is B. That itself becomes punishable. This is maybe in some strange ways an extension of the law of contempt across the board, where truth is no longer a defense. It is because you are disagreeing with our version. It does not matter if what you are saying is true or not. We will take action against you, because telling the truth could be A, B, C. Somehow it becomes sedition for whatever reason. And that is precisely what is happening. As far as the question of the abuse of the law, well, I mean, frankly, the abuse of the law is extending to sections other than this. It is extending to all sorts of matters. You look at the Bhima Koregaon cases, you look at the kind of arrests that have been made, you look at the kind of things that have happened over the past 1.5 years, you look at the kind of cases the Delhi police has made out in the cases of violence in Northeast Delhi. In what sense are those sections, the way they are being applied, not in abuse of law already, in the sense, and that is something, as Nikhil just pointed out, we cannot do anything about the law when it is abused. Has to correct itself from the legal machinery that is available in this country. That is what a constitutional democracy, as opposed to just a democracy, is. We are not questioning whether India is a democracy or not. Narendra Modi has a popular mandate. But is it a constitutional democracy when checks and balances and all the constitutional provisions that define a constitutional democracy break down? Abuse of law on a large scale is the failure of a constitutional democracy. And I don't think we any longer fit the description of what it means to be a constitutional democracy.
Indeed, it was worrying. I want to ask a last question, Nikhil. As I said, draw your attention to how platforms are behaving in India and how they're behaving in the United States, where they're headquartered, and perhaps in Western Europe. For example, I don't think the Washington Post or the New York Times would have faced a situation where their Twitter accounts would have been withheld. Perhaps the same for the Guardian or Le Monde in France and so on. So what's the difference between India and the United States and other Western democracies?
Well, very clearly the law. Twitter has today recourse in saying that they are following a legal order given to them, and they are justified in doing so. In the US, would you get an order for shutting down the account of a publication? You probably would not. And if you did, then there would be greater uproar about this, because they seem to value their freedoms more than we do, by the looks of it, right? So, but let me just take a step back and look at how platforms are behaving right now. There's been incitement to violence by Donald Trump in the past as well. There has been a significant amount of misinformation and disinformation from him as well. Twitter and Facebook did not act on that until he lost power. And so these platforms are legitimately, and you think about it, if you're a platform, you are going to be afraid of the entity that can hurt you in that country. And so they do bow before power. That's the nature of business. I mean, come on. How many businesses in India criticize the budget? Not even a handful. So everyone bends towards power, and it is the constitution of the country and the legal system that is meant to keep the power of the state in check. We seem to not have checks and balances in place in some of these instances. In the US, they lean more towards freedom, so they allowed that hate speech and that incitement to violence and the drip feeding of hate to continue until Trump lost power, and then they acted on him. They banned him. I don't think any such thing is going to ever happen in India unless an entity loses power. And I think, because these platforms aren't headquartered here, they have less skin in the game here than they have in the US. To that end, just remember something, right? A few weeks ago, everyone was questioning whether the platforms should have the power to ban politicians and those in power as well. And many countries did speak up against that. In fact, I remember Tejasvi Surya said that there needs to be a reworking of the intermediary liability part of the IT Act, to specifically address the power of platforms to censor speech. But when those orders are coming directly from the government, then who's there to check the power of the government? And that's the
Yes.
question we should be asking ourselves. It's easy to blame a business in this case that has, and I'm not speaking for the businesses, but it's easy to blame them, but they don't have public accountability here. The government
Yes.
should, and it does. And we have to hold them to account on this.
That's really my takeaway from this conversation. The bottom line really is that it's we the people of India who must demand accountability. And I mean, before I let you both go, I just want to point out something I remembered. I was reading that Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was many things, but among them he was also a journalist. And for 3 articles he wrote on young India, he was charged with sedition. So that's an interesting thought on which I feel we can close this conversation. Thanks so much, both of you, for joining us.
Thanks, Venkatesh.